Okay, well, I'd like to welcome you all to a celebration of the bicentennial of the first Burton Brewed India Pale Ale. This is being presented today by the British Guild of Beer Writers, myself, Ian Webster, and Samuel Allsopp and Sons. So, welcome today. First of all, just a few bit of housekeeping things. Fire exits are there where the main entrance. Also, out the back there through the smoking area, and if needs be, you can actually go through the bar area and get out that way as well. There are no fire alarms planned today, so if you hear one, it's a proper fire. Run. The toilets are over in the corner. I am reliably informed that the toilets are well worth a visit, even if you don't need to go, because they are beautiful. You've probably already come in and had a beer, so they're selling excellent Bass behind the bar, and they also have cobs there as well, which are available for £2. You will see that there is another beer on the bar at the moment that you're not allowed to try, and that is the Allsopp Celebration Pale Ale, which has been especially brewed for today. So I'd like to do the thanks before we start. I'd like to thank the British Guild of Beer Writers. I'd like to thank Samuel Allsopp and Sons. And all the speakers are here as well. And I would especially like to thank the Cons Club, because this should have been taking place at the National Brewery Centre. This was booked about 8 months ago. And obviously everybody knows what's happened, or most people will know what's happened with the National Brewery Centre, which is very sad and very emotional. But the Cons Club were very, very good to welcome us at such short notice. Talking of things that are out of our control, there are several things that are out of our control, things like illness. Unfortunately, you've probably noticed that I'm not Emma Inch. I don't know what the giveaway is, but I'm not Emma Inch. Emma's not very well, so she cancelled a couple of days ago. And also, unfortunately, Roger Protz can't be here either. He had an operation, and I don't think his recuperation has gone quite as well as he hoped. So we all send Roger our best. Something else that's also out of our control, and this is one thing that we're going to do in a short while. We were supposed to be unveiling this plaque, or rather Jamie also was supposed to be unveiling this plaque, which has been kindly paid for by East Staffordshire Borough Council. And this was going to be hung on the wall down there on Molson Coors property, and slightly disappointing. Molson Coors have been unhelpful, I think is the right word. So what we're going to do, we're going to stand there, go down there. I'm going to stand there. I'm going to hold the plaque. We're going to stand in the place which was the site of the original Allsopp brewery. So that was the site where the original IPA would have been brewed. So we're going to stand there. Jamie's going to dedicate the plaque, and then we're going to come back here, and then we're going to toast Samuel with the Celebration IPA. And the last thing before we start, phones. Please, can you make sure that you have your phones turned off? Because if I hear anybody's phone, I think the regulation fine is around. And as there's about 60 people in here, it'll cost you a small fortune. So, without further ado, I've been asked to talk, and I picked my own subject, and it was about how important it is for remembering anniversaries in Burton-on-Trent, especially with me being a Burtonian, and especially with this being a brewing town. So rather than having loads and loads of slides, I've got a prop, and this is my prop, and this is a double diamond teapot. Okay, I bought this teapot a few years ago. Very nice. Never brewed tea in it, and apparently it's not dishwasher safe. The teapot, I think, probably dates from around about the mid-1950s, because that's when Incoop and Allsopp, as they were, started producing all these wonderful bits of brewery honour, their water jugs and things such as that. And a lot of these are really, really collectible. The significance of the teapot linking to today may not be apparent. And the story goes that Double Diamond originally was an Incoop beer, and they started brewing Double Diamond probably, I would say, around about the 1870s. So, yeah, they started brewing this beer, and then in 1934, Incoop amalgamated with Samuel Allsopp's, and the two breweries were actually next door to each other. So what they did was they had a look at Double Diamond, and they changed the recipe. So it went from being an Incoop recipe, and they picked a Samuel Allsopp and Sons recipe, which could actually be traced back to the 1822 beer. So that is the link, and of course the other link with the teapot is the story of Samuel Allsopp and the teapot. Jamie's nodding. He knew this.
Taken off his presentation.
Sorry. Have I?
No.
All right. Okay. Well, the story goes that Samuel Allsopp was invited down to London, and at the time Samuel Allsopp, he bought a brewery off his uncle, and the brewery wasn't doing very well due to Napoleon basically taking pretty much all of his trade. So the brewery was struggling, and he was invited down to London by a guy from the East India Company, and his name was Campbell Marchbanks. And he dined with him, and he bought out these couple of bottles of Hodgson's Pale Ale, passed it to Samuel and said, we're looking for somebody basically to do this because this Hodgson bloke's annoying us. He was trying to undercut the East India Company, and the East India Company were that powerful, they really, really were not somebody you wanted to get on the wrong side of. So the story goes that Samuel came back to Burton-on-Trent, and he brewed his first India Pale Ale in a teapot. Now, I'd like to think that the people at Incoop and Allsopp in 1955 went, fantastic, why don't we make a teapot? Because that would be really, really clever, but I guess it was probably just a pure accident. So, a little bit about myself. I'm Burton born and bred. I arrived in the world the same week that the Beatles released the White Album, and I was born at Burton General Hospital. And I don't think it's too big a stretch to think that the first few breaths that I took had something which Bass had probably pumped into the atmosphere. So right from the very, very start, brewing was part of me. And as a small child, I have distinct memories of the importance of beer, but when you're that age, you don't really understand. You have uncles and members of the family and friends and like that who work for the brewery, but you don't quite understand it. My early understanding of beer was the smell. I grew up in a house on Grange Street, which is round the town hall, and my mum has never driven, so she used to drag me like this down into town. And first you'd go past Allied Breweries, and then you go past Bass, and all you could smell was what I still describe to this day as the most amazing smell in the world. I absolutely love it. Some people say it stinks. I think that's what makes you a Burtonian, is the fact that you can actually smell that and go, wow. There was also a few other breweries as well in the town at the time. There was Everard's Brewery, and we used to go past Everard's Brewery when I was going to visit my grandmother. There was Marston, Thompson and Evershed as well. And there was also the one that I can't remember, which was Truman, Hanbury and Buxton, which was on Derby Street. This was, I think they stopped brewing in about 1973, and it got knocked down the following year. So in 1973, I was about that high. So I don't actually remember Truman's. However, these 5 breweries were a far cry from Burton-upon-Trent at its peak. So in 1822, the town had earned its title of the brewing capital of the world. I picked 1822 because that's round about that right time, and it's also the time when it had 35 separate breweries in the town. Now, bearing in mind that Burton was nowhere near the size it is now, so the percentage of people who worked for the brewery was amazingly high. So I'm actually going to have to read these out. Now, some of these are really, really well known to everybody. Everybody will know these because they're household names. Some of them you'll probably go, ooh. So there was Bass, Ratcliffe and Gretton. Bass, of course, they were everywhere, all over the town. There was William Worthington, whose brewery was just about over there, a couple of 100 yards that way. There was Samuel Allsopp, of course. Samuel Allsopp had a brewery on High Street up here, and it also had a brewery which is at the bottom of the station bridge. There was Incoop, who were next to Samuel Allsopp. There was also John Marsden, but at that point in time, John Marsden still brewed in Horninglow. He hadn't moved to the Albion Brewery, which they've been in since 1897, I think it is. There was Sydney Evershed on Bank Square, which is up there, and of course they later amalgamated with Marsden's. There was Mann, Crossman and Paulin, which were a London concern, and they built the brewery, the Albion Brewery, which was later used by Marsden's. There was Thomas Salt on High Street. Next to Thomas Salt, there was the Burton Brewery Company. On Lichfield Street, there was Charles Hill. There was John Bell. If we went a little bit out of town, but still counting as Burton-on-Trent, up to Woodville, there was Brunton Bucknell. There was Ball & Co. There was Betteridge and Sons. Just over the road there was the Blue Posts Brewery, so that's where the crossing now sits. There was Bridge Street Brewery on Bridge Street, but obviously not the bridge that exists now. There was Henry Boddington, the Manchester brewer. He had the brewery on the Old Trent Bridge. Joseph Bowler, who had the Anchor Brewery on New Street. There was Bindley on New Street. There was Thomas Cooper. If you went up to Victoria Crescent, there was Thomas Cooper, Samuel Carter. There was Frederick Heap. There was Clayton and Co. up there as well. And you also have people like James Eady, Thomas Robinson, Charrington Head, which is next to the Leopard pub. You can still see Charrington and Co.'s fine ales over there, although the brewery is long since gone. There was some of the really, really obscure ones like Popplewell and Dawson, who were at the Sun Brewery on Moore Street. There was Truman Hanbury and Buxton, as I've already mentioned. Broadway Street, there was the imaginatively named Broadway Brewery. There was Porritt, Norman and Co., who bought the Broadway Brewery later in 1822. There was Andrew Barclay Walker. There was James Porter. There was Thomas Sykes. And finally, there was Peter Walker on Clarence Street. And there is the part of Peter Walker's brewery that still exists, which is the Goat Maltins, which is a very, very iconic building. And I don't think anywhere else of the size of Burton-on-Trent can boast such an amazing and rich history. So I did a bit of counting, and I think there's been about 100 physical brewing buildings or breweries in the town since 1708. But if you add in all the name changes, there's been nearly 200 different businesses. So with that number of breweries, you get a lot of anniversaries. So today we're here to celebrate the 200 years of India Pale Ale. But would you believe that 2002, it's already 25 years since the short-lived Bevied Bull formed? I don't remember them. They're only around 3 years. It's 150 years since the closure of Hill and Sherratt. It's 150 years since the dissolution of the partnership between Samuel Carter and Arthur Scattergood. Charrington Head arrived here 150 years ago. And Popplewell and Dawson also founded 150 years ago. And it's also, and this is a little bit something to do with today, it's also 250 years since Benjamin Wilson Sr. passed his brewery on to Benjamin Wilson Jr. And Benjamin Wilson Jr. was the person who then sold his brewery to his nephew, Samuel Allsopp. So a lot of these anniversaries, I hadn't even got a clue until I'd sat down and done this talk, wrote this talk. So, of course, I'm not saying that we have to mark absolutely everything, because I don't think many people would turn out for the Popplewell and Dawson thing. But it is important as historians, and it is important as people in Burton-on-Trent, that we actually mark the big brewery, mark these big anniversaries. And I think the last time we did anything like this would be back in 2009, when we took over Marsden's Club, and we opened best part of 100 bottles of the Bass Corkers, including a couple of the Bass Ratcliffe Ale, which was 150 years old to the day. So I think you were there for that, wasn't you, Steve? Yes, and certainly Harry was, and quite a few other people were as well. So who should be behind the preservation of our history? So recent events have shown that Marsden's are part, and I'm saying that because I know that we've got somebody from Marsden's in the room, but no, Marsden's are part. Those that should do this job have very, very little interest. So I'm not really going to go into the recent events that we've had with Molson Coors. But what I will do is I'll also raise an example of the Bass Triangle. The Bass Triangle, which formed part of the world's first trademark, is currently owned by AB InBev. And I think AB InBev don't actually care really, about this. The beer is brewed under licence at Marsden's, and they make an absolutely amazing job of it. And this year we celebrated something called National Bass Day, which was just basically a bunch of amateur people getting together saying we wanted to promote Bass. We love Bass. Bass is amazing. It is one of my most favourite drinks. Bass is amazing. Let's promote it. So we all got together. I organised a competition to find the best bass in Burton-on-Trent, and we had about 30 odd people going around the town, and they all scored it. And the winner was the Roebuck, very deservedly so. We're going to do it again next year, and I think the competition will be fierce next year, because there was one person who wanted to win it who unfortunately missed out by very, very few points. So, yes, the fact that there's so many of you sat here today on a weekday is heartwarming, because it shows there's still an interest. There's still an interest in history. And I'm going to close now, and I'm going to close now with a very, very simple message. And that is that never forget that the future of our history is in our hands. Thank you. So what I'd like